The storm came down off the high passes like a vengeful thing. Bitter wind slashed across the open range, tugging at manets and oilskins, flattening the scrub grasses in harsh waves. It turned the sky gunmetal gray and cloaked the mountains in a veil of sleet so thick the ridgelines vanished. Thunder cracked over the canyon like a whip, and the rain turned the dirt trail to sludge. Jedediah Kane rode with his collar up and hat brim low, his Mustang muscling against the wind. He wasn't headed anywhere in particular, just away, same as always. He didn't favor towns. Folks talked too much there, and quiet had become his only kind of peace. He'd been drifting a long while now, ever since the fire took his home and what little else he'd loved with it. Some days he thought he'd ridden off the edge of the world. Other days he hoped he had. The road wound down into a low ravine where the creek had swollen and spilled its banks. He reined in, squinting into the curtain of rain. There was someone beside the flooded bend, a splash of blue against the dun-colored mud, not moving. He cursed under his breath, kicked his horse into a trot, and slid off in the muck, boots sinking near to the ankle. Closer now, he saw it was a woman. She sat half upright against a crooked cottonwood, soaked through, her hair plastered in dark streaks across her cheeks. Her dress was torn at the hem, her hands raw and reddened from the cold. One of her shoes was gone, and the other hung loose on her foot. There was a look about her, hollow and still, like she'd stepped out of life and hadn't found her way back yet. He crouched beside her. "Ma'am," he said low, "you all right?" No answer. Her eyes blinked slow, blue like mountain forget-me-nots. She looked at him, not through him, but not quite to him either. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he added, hands open, voice steady. "You out here alone." She made a sound, half breath, half sob, then flinched as if it cost her something to speak. "Horse spooked," she said, barely audible over the wind. "Ran off, couldn't find the trail again." Her voice had a fine-tuned softness to it, worn at the edges like something left in the sun. He studied the way she held her side, her sleeve stiff with old blood. "Think you got hurt?" he asked. "Can you stand?" She didn't answer, he didn't press. Instead, he slid off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. She didn't protest, though she trembled when he touched her. He didn't ask her name. She hadn't asked his. Seemed like naming something made it real, and neither of them looked ready to face much real just yet. He helped her to the saddle. She winced but made no complaint. As he climbed up behind her, he felt her weight lean ever so slightly into him, not trust but necessity. That was enough. They rode west, toward the scrublands that hemmed the edge of the high desert. A place he knew, half-wild and wind-gnawed, where he'd stashed supplies in an old line shack miles from any beaten path. She didn't speak again, and he didn't ask. There was something sacred in silence when the storm still raged, something steady in the rhythm of hooves against mud and the warmth of her pressed to his chest. He felt her shiver now, and then, not from cold, he thought, but from the way a soul shakes when it's been brought low and doesn't know if it dares rise again. When the shack came into sight, low-roofed and gray as the sky, he felt her breath catch. Relief or dread he couldn't say. He swung down first, lifted her down slow as you would a wounded bird. Her eyes found his face again, that same wary, startled light. Inside, he set about lighting a fire with shaking hands, kindling crackling like bones underfoot. She sat near it, arms wrapped round her knees, soaked hair dripping into the dirt floor. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the hiss of rain on the roof and the pop of pine sap in the flames. He didn't stare, not quite, but he looked, because there was something in the way she watched the fire, like it was the only true thing left in the world. Something in her stillness that held more story than a man might ever coax out with questions. He didn't know who she was, didn't know where she came from, but he knew this much. She'd been running from something long before the storm ever found her, and whatever it was, it had left its mark. But now she was here, with him, and he couldn't seem to look away. The fire held through the night, flickering low and steady, shadows dancing across the cabin walls. Jade sat across from her, legs folded, eyes half-lidded from the long ride and wet cold still clinging to his bones. She hadn't spoken more, not even when he'd offered a tin of beans and a scrap of jerky. Just nodded faintly and eaten in silence, hands wrapped around the warm tin cup like it was something holy. He didn't press. Words would come when they had to. By morning, the rain had eased into a mist that curled round the hills like breath. He stepped outside to tend the horse, boots crunching frost that rimmed the earth. The mountains loomed pale and silver above the tree line, and for a moment he just stood there, filling his lungs with cold air and trying to feel steady again. When he came back in, she was curled on the cot, blanket tucked close, face turned to the wall. He slept in a chair near the hearth, gun at hand, not from mistrust but old habit. She didn't stir as he stoked the fire back to life, though her breath hitched once, like something in her dreams wouldn't let her go. Later she sat by the window, tracing a finger down the fogged glass, watching the thin gray world beyond. Jade brewed coffee and slid her a cup. She took it without looking, without thanks. Still, her hands were steadier than the night before. "You got folks?" he asked, not unkindly. She didn't answer right off, then not anymore. He nodded. That said more than a history book might. "North of here," she added, almost an afterthought. "Small farm, used to be, don't know if it's still standing." He waited. Sometimes that was all a person needed, room enough to breathe their story without someone tugging it out of them. "There was a man," she said, voice low. "Not my kin, not kind, came through 2 weeks past, took what he wanted, burned the rest." He saw her fingers tighten round the cup, the small tremble she tried to hide. Anger kindled in his chest, slow and cold like a coming frost. "You ran," he said. "I fought," she corrected, and turned her face to him for the first time in hours. There was steel there, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the ruin. "Then I ran." He didn't speak. He just nodded again because he understood more than he cared to admit. Some things you didn't fight to win, you fought to live, and sometimes just surviving was enough. That evening she helped him patch a leak in the roof. Clumsy work with numb fingers, but she insisted. It was the first time she moved with purpose, not just survival. Her name came then, without warning, as she braced a board for him to hammer. "Clara." He looked at her, the sound of it echoing between them like a stone dropped in a still pond. She didn't offer more. He didn't ask for more. "Jade," he said simply. She nodded once, like they'd exchanged something binding. Maybe they had. That night, as wind sighed through the eaves and fire painted gold across the walls, Clara sat close to the warmth, her eyes softer now, less haunted. Jade watched her without shame. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, in that way firelight makes every scar seem earned, but because something in her steadied him. She didn't flinch from his gaze anymore. She didn't smile either, but she didn't look away. And that was the start of it. Not love, not yet. Something quieter, a kind of tether. Two people who'd walked through hellfire and found, against reason or right, that they were still standing, together now. He didn't know where the road would bend next, but he knew this. Wherever Clara went, he'd follow. He'd found her in the storm, and he'd never stopped looking at her since. Spring came grudging to the high desert, slow and uncertain. The snows melted from the passes, leaving behind a lacework of runoff that carved the land into veins of silver. Green returned in hesitant brushstrokes, wild sage sprouting by the cabin's stoop, pale blossoms budding in the cottonwoods down by the creek. Clara rose with the sun most days. Jade would wake to find her standing outside, boots still unlaced, hair loose to her shoulders, staring eastward like she was waiting for something to catch up to her. He didn't ask what. Some ghosts needed naming in their own time. They lived quiet, the two of them, not lovers, not quite strangers. He taught her how to mend tack and trap rabbit, how to read the weather by the curl of clouds. She showed him how to stitch a shirt from an old flour sack, how to find wild onions by their smell. Their days passed in the rhythm of necessity, chopping wood, boiling washwater, patching leaks in the roof. Not much was said, but each silence grew easier to share. One morning she brought in a sparrow with a broken wing, cradled in her palms like a prayer. Jade watched her feed it soaked breadcrumbs, coax its trembling body into the warmth of a box lined with wool. She didn't name it, just tended to it daily, with the same quiet care she gave the fire or the kettle or the way she swept the floor in long, slow strokes. "You think it'll fly again?" he asked her, watching from the doorway. "Don't know," she said without looking up, "but it wants to, that's something." He thought about that long after she left the room. Then came the day Clara didn't wake at dawn. He found her curled under the blanket, pale and sweating, breath shallow. Fever took her hard and fast, and Jade felt a helplessness bloom in his chest that near split him in two. He boiled water, bathed her face, whispered nonsense to keep the fear at bay. She drifted in and out, eyes glassy, hands gripping the sheet like she was drowning. He sat beside her through the night, listening to her mutter names he didn't know, pleas he couldn't answer. Once, she reached for him in her sleep, fingers wrapping round his like she thought he might vanish if she let go. By dawn, the fever broke. She woke trembling and confused, then saw him there and sighed, relief or sorrow, he couldn't tell, maybe both. "Thought I was back there," she whispered, "that night." "You ain't," he said, "you're here." She didn't cry, just nodded once and closed her eyes like she believed him. That afternoon he found the sparrow's box empty. The bird had flown. He looked up to the rafters and saw it perched there, whole now, feathers catching light. When he told Clara, she only smiled, a real one, thin and fleeting, but it stayed with him. Later, while he chopped wood, she came outside and stood beside him, not to help, just to be there. She leaned against the fence rail and watched the hills. After a while, she spoke. "I think I need to go back," she said, "to the farm, see what's left." He paused mid-swing. "You sure?" "No," she said, "but I won't be whole till I do." He studied her then, the set of her shoulders, the line of her jaw. She wasn't the same woman he'd found in the storm. She walked through fire again and come out tempered. "I'll ride with you," he said. She didn't thank him, just looked at him like maybe she hadn't known how much she needed to hear that until just now. And that was how the next part of their story began, not with a kiss or a promise, but with two people packing saddlebags side by side, heading east not to chase the past, but to face it, together. They rode at first light, frost still on the grass, breath rising in plumes as they passed the edge of the known world. Jade didn't ask how far or what waited there. He didn't need to. Clara's silence was a map all its own. She led them east, where the mountains gave way to open prairie, where old fences slumped and wind moved through tall grass like a whisper of the dead. The land changed as they traveled. Creeks ran wider, the soil darkened, and the air smelled of cedar and rain. At night, they camped beneath stars that hung low and sharp as glass, their fire casting long shadows over the ridge. She didn't talk much, and neither did he. But there were moments, the way she handed him coffee before he asked, the way he steadied her horse without a word, that felt like more than conversation ever could. They passed a church long fallen to ruin, its steeple snapped like a bone. She paused there, looking at it with a strange expression, part grief, part defiance. "We were married in one like that," she said. He didn't answer, didn't need to. Her voice wasn't asking for reply. It was naming a ghost aloud so it would let her sleep that night. On the 5th day, they reached her land. Or what was left of it. The farmhouse was ash and splinters. Blackened beams jutted from the ground like ribs. The barn was gone, only the stone footings remained. Grass had grown through the cracks, wildflowers blooming where floorboards once creaked. Clara dismounted slowly. Her boots crushed what might have been the hearthstone. She walked the length of the ruin with careful steps, like she could still feel the shape of rooms beneath her feet. She crouched near what was once the front porch, fingers grazing the dirt, and said nothing for a long time. Jade stood back, letting her reckon with it. He'd known ruin. He knew how the weight of absence could hollow a person if they weren't given time to stand inside it. At last she spoke. "He did this because I wouldn't leave." Her voice was steady, not hard, just tired. "I fought for it, this land. My mother's bones are here. I couldn't let it go." Jade walked to her, slow and careful. Not to fix anything, he couldn't, but to be near. "I buried him," she said, "after." It took him a moment to understand. "I tracked him," she added, "took back what he stole, and I buried him where no one would find him." She looked at him then, like daring him to flinch, but he didn't. He only nodded once. "You did what you had to." That evening, they pitched their small canvas by the edge of the old orchard, where 3 gnarled apple trees still stood, limbs crooked but blooming. Clara sat beneath one with her knees drawn up, and Jade brought her a tin of stew. "What now?" he asked quietly. She tilted her head, eyes on the ruined skyline. "I rebuild, slowly, piece by piece." He chewed a bite, thoughtful. "I can help," he said, "if you want." "I do." There wasn't a smile, but her fingers brushed his as she took the bowl, and he felt that touch for hours after. That night she dreamed without crying. He knew because he stayed awake, just watching, not like a man haunted, like a man who had finally found the thing worth staying for. Summer settled slow over the scorched land, breathing life back into the bones of Clara's homestead. The earth, dark with memory, began to yield again, green shoots pushing through the ash, the orchard thick with bees, the first small tomatoes clinging to vines she'd coaxed from a saved handful of seeds. Jade stayed. He never said he would, never asked if he could. He just kept waking up beside the fire pit, boots on by dawn, tools in hand before the coffee boiled. She didn't send him away, didn't speak the words for weeks. But she always made enough for two, and when her fingers brushed his sleeve or she passed him a hammer, her eyes said what her voice did not. They built a shed first, low, solid, with a clean roof and walls tight against the wind. Then a fence for the goats she bartered from a neighbor 2 valleys over. She learned to ride better, smoother, and he taught her how to read the sky before the storms rolled in. She taught him how to read silence, how to hear meaning in quiet and solace in shared breath. One night after the last post had been sunk and the sun had bruised the sky to violet, she sat beside him on the stoop of the shed they now called home. A jug of cold water passed between them. Her arm brushed his, and she didn't move away. "I never thought I'd come back," she said, "much less find anything left of me here." "You didn't come back to find it," he said. "You came back to plant it." She was quiet a while, then turned to him. "And you still looking for something?" He looked at her, not at the land, not at the house rising piece by piece, but at her. "Found it," he said. And she believed him. Autumn came in a golden hush. They harvested what little had grown. Laughed the first time a goat got loose and chewed her drying laundry. He carved her a wooden comb. She left it on the windowsill but used it each morning. They danced once, late in the season, on a cold, clear night when he brought out an old fiddle he hadn't touched in years. She stepped slow into his arms, boots scuffing the dirt. They didn't speak, didn't need to. The stars wheeled above them and time folded in, and for a while it was only that moment, wind in her hair, his hand at the small of her back, both of them swaying to the rhythm of a life hard-earned. And when winter came again, and the snows returned with all their quiet, he was still there. Still watching her as she leaned over the stove, still reaching for her hand when she passed him a cup, still finding her in every morning light. She never asked why. And he never looked away.